So, Dennis,
Mm-hmm.
since this was your idea, what are we doing and why are we doing it?
This is I started by calling it an Ask Me Anything, an AMA, because that's a Reddit thing, but it's us. So it's an Ask Us Anything. But so we posted on our Patreon page a few weeks ago, this post that said, hey, do you guys have an interest in us doing an AMA? Because you have a lot of questions for us in email, but like, do we want to gather them all in one place and just do a thing? And people were like, heck yeah. So we put out an announcement, we're going to do it. Send us questions. And we collected some pretty great questions from some pretty great people, as you'll see soon. So yeah, we're just going to read questions to each other that we got from our patrons. And this is going up on YouTube, so everybody can watch it, but only patrons got to ask questions of us. So people are going to get to peck our brains and see what we think about a variety of things and give us a chance to talk about stuff we don't normally talk about in the podcast.
Okay.
You want to start? Yeah.
I could.
Yeah.
I could. I'll start right now. So a Dr. Floyd Toole from
sounds familiar.
Canada, I think, writes, Dear Audio Unleashed. No, he didn't say that. The new Dolby Atmos music recommendations for professionals employ front-wide loudspeakers at plus minus 50 degrees. They say, quote, 9.1.4 or 9.1.6 configurations, which utilize, quote, wide, unquote, speakers are preferred and considered our standard reference. The front wide loudspeakers turn out to be especially effective at generating pleasant spaciousness for music, so it is a good idea in principle. What are the chances that people schooled in 5.1 and 7.1 for movies will embrace 2 more channels for Atmos music? Maybe move the rear speakers to the front. There are no flyovers in music.
Yeah. I mean, I've reviewed a few 16-channel AV systems. I even reviewed a 32-channel one, and I've explored using front-wide channels in my system before, mostly with movies. I have to say, buddy, it really freaking works, man. It sounds great. The problem is, I don't know how to make it work in a permanent setup. It's always been like, okay, I've got these speakers put in a sort of awkward place because my rooms have sort of developed around a 5.1, like you said, and then add height. That's not too difficult. It's not taking up any more space, but always inevitably the wide speakers are in a walkway, in a pathway. Where do I put them? So I get to enjoy them while I'm reviewing the system, but as a permanent solution, I wouldn't be able to make it work, but I wish I could. If I had a dedicated listening space, I would way prefer front wide speakers to rear surrounds or definitely even overhead speakers. What about you?
Okay, so I have to say, first of all, there are no flyovers in music. Challenge accepted.
Yes.
The Butterburger House Band our next piece of music will have a flyover in it. At least as rendered through the Dolby Atmos renderer, which, it's the best we can do.
Right.
So actually, I have experience with this, weirdly enough. When I was was I marketing director for Dolby? David Chesky, friend of the podcast, sort of, I guess. He's probably never listened to it, but
He's got
anyway,
stuff to do, man.
David likes to do things differently and likes to go his own way, as he's always done with his record labels and stuff like that, and his own recordings and his recordings of other people. So David, the original DVD audio standard, the DVD audio standard, since it was never, there was only one. We didn't need another.
Was the one.
It was actually, it was thought of as 5.1 channels, but it was really 6.0 channels. It was 6 full bandwidth channels, one of which was used for the subwoofer. But he said, well, music doesn't need an LFE channel, right? And why don't we take the 6 speakers and repurpose them and have, since he didn't like a lot of people in music production didn't like the center speaker thing. It was 2 main speakers, 2 wide speakers, and then 2 surround speakers. And he actually did a bunch of recordings like this. And I liked it, but my whole attitude was like, well, who's going to set up a home system like this? So that, I think, is the problem here. I think it's a good idea, as Floyd says, in principle. And in practice, I think it's a good idea. It actually, I'm kind of the belief that, the more speakers, the better. And I'm not these guys who think like, oh, you shouldn't have more speakers because you just spend all your money on 2 really good speakers. But you don't, as I think Floyd Toole will be the first one to tell you, you don't have to do that. You can get really good speakers for affordable prices if they're properly engineered. So I think it's a nice idea. I don't think that, there's the home acceptance for Dolby Atmos systems is pretty small. I think I don't know the numbers, but it's not a lot. It's not like the AV receiver business is flourishing.
I don't know the numbers now, but when I was at Home Theater Review, I think in 2018, we did a survey of our readers, and it turned out 5% of them had Dolby Atmos capabilities. That was in 2018 on a site called Home Theater Review.
Okay. We're 6 years into it, but I would speculate the vast majority of people who listen to Atmos are listening to it on headphones or with sound bars. So with sound bars, it doesn't matter because you're basically, sound bars can have all kinds of different driver configurations, and the manufacturers are mapping it and putting in processing and beam steering and all this kind of stuff, right? So it doesn't really matter. So my guess is that people who are producing Atmos music, will there be some studio guy that appears in Tape Op in a year who says, oh man, I put these speakers in and it's all the difference in the world, because, maybe that helps them get clients, right? But at the end result, there are going to be so few people that actually put this into their home systems that, for me as a music producer and on my own little level, any Atmos stuff I do, I would just try to do for headphones.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And consider that to be the main audience for what I'm doing, which means it kind of doesn't work.
Yeah. But we've got another question here from a Dr. Sean Olive, I believe another name that a lot of people will know. Sean asks, where do you think audio is heading in the next 5 years in terms of trends and disruption? What will be the enabling technologies that drive them?
Oh, boy. I think 5 years ago, I could have answered this a lot better. 5 years ago, we were more on the cusp of DSP being in everything. And it kind of was in so many ways, but now I really feel like people are getting into more advanced kind of DSP to where you can do things like, like loudness curves and things like that, and actually shaping the EQ to work differently at different volumes, and doing things like, more sophisticated kind of limiting that, protects your speaker drivers while, without sounding like you're slamming into a limiter, right? So my suspicion is, look, we've already kind of figured out how to make good speakers, right? There's not going to be a new speaker technology that sounds radically better. There are new speaker technologies like MIM speakers, right? Those are kind of happening in headphones, earphones, in phones. But that's a manufacturing and cost advantage rather than a sound quality advantage. So, at least in my experience so far, and I have actually tested some of them. So I think just more and better DSP, and people will get even better. They're already good at it, but they'll get even better at making little speakers sound fairly big. And I did see, I do have to say, I did see this interesting Fraunhofer thing. The release just came out about, I can't remember what it's called. I saw it on Audio Express. Maybe we'll just drop a link in. It was this Fraunhofer technology that's basically doing immersive sound with whatever speakers you have available. So you could set up a bunch of Bluetooth speakers, I guess, and make that into an Atmos system, right?
Very cool.
Or I guess a bunch of, Wi-Fi speakers, or maybe a sound bar and who knows what, and it would automatically figure out how to do immersive sound. They're showing this at CES. Obviously, I haven't seen it. I'm not going to CES, so I won't hear it. But things like that are interesting, I think, and that's all basically DSP. That's figuring out how to map all those sounds to all those different speakers. So that's is that enough? Why don't you say
I
something?
have nothing intelligent to add to that. So go ahead and ask the next question, because that was a great answer. And I'm just like, yep.
Okay, but we're not going to have some new amplifier that suddenly sounds better than the amplifiers from 50 years ago. Sorry, ain't going to happen.
No, but I do think we're probably going to see more companies hopping on the retro trend, right? Because I think if you look at the number of people out there buying integrated amplifiers these days is pretty small, let's say. But one of the most exciting integrated amplifiers of the past year has been the NADC 3050, which is a sort of visual recreation of their original 1970s stereo receiver, but with modern technology and Hypex amps and Blue-OS streaming and all of that. It looks old school, and on the inside, it's new school. I've been begging Marantz for years. I'm like, guys, your old 1980 stereo receivers are super popular. Pioneer too. I wish they would get on board, but I think some of them are going to figure out if we could make something that looks like it came from the 80s, but has the guts of something from the 21st century. That scratches a nostalgia itch for the type of people who are buying stereo gear these days.
I agree completely.
So I'm gonna predict that we're gonna see that trend continue and grow. I think because NAD finally had the cojones to make it happen, and I think other people are gonna follow.
Cool. I completely agree with that. So Next question from Nicolai Mowinkle Trisness. Can I use the Harman target curve as an indicator when I measure and work with the frequency response in my listening room? What do you think, Dennis?
It doesn't matter what I think, because brilliantly we had an answer to that question.
True, but you're the guy who tests things that allow you to work with the frequency response in your listening room. I don't do that anymore.
Well, that's true. But I don't really do anything above like the Schroeder frequency anyway, and I don't think you should in most cases. But I really love the comment that was a reply to this. Floyd Toole himself answered that question, and I say we just read Dr. Toole's answer because I thought it was great.
Well, you have a good radio voice, so you read it.
All right. Got the good radio face too. So anyway, Floyd says room curves are results, not targets. Bingo. As you and I always say, it's descriptive, not prescriptive. Dr. Toole continues, at frequencies above the transition frequency, they are well predicted by the early reflections curve in anechoic spinoramas, as Erin measures. He's talking about Erin Hardison of Erin's Audio Corner. Friend of the pod. I regret having shown the Harman curve, and he's talking about the in-room curve, not the Harman target curve for headphones, by the way. I regret having shown the Harman curve, in quotes, which was clearly stated in my book as being a result for several highly rated forward-firing loudspeakers. There is no assurance that equalizing a flawed loudspeaker to have the same steady-state room curve will produce equivalent sound quality. In fact, there's every chance it might degrade the performance of a good loudspeaker by altering the direct sound. The on-axis / listening window curve, which is the first determinant of sound quality. Room curves are dominated by off-axis sounds, which explains why they become useful when loudspeakers are omnidirectional at low frequencies. Plays right into what I said. Room curves are essential information below the transition Schroeder frequency and must be measured after the system is set up. Nothing in the anechoic data can be used to predict room resonances. Exclamation point. I have nothing to add to that. That's perfect.
Well, come on. If Floyd's already answered the question, do we really need to answer it?
No. But I'm not sure that we're putting that answer out there for people who aren't patrons and couldn't read that comment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Your turn.
So anyway, I got a question for you from Erin Hardison. I think this is a question for both of us. Erin Hardison of Erin's Audio Corner. Erin, thanks for checking in with us. He asks, what is the worst experience you've ever had reviewing a product? And he gives examples, troubling manufacturers, bad product, etc. And then he says, what is the best? Should we name names here? Because I've got a bad one, but it's from some people that I'm friends with these people. I'm friends with these people, and I hate that I have to say this, but like the Bowers & Wilkins PX7 headphone was one of the worst reviews experiences I've ever had because, it was, I liked some things about it. Yes, idiosyncratic is the word. Okay. And when when Jerry Del Cogliano, who's the publisher of Home Theater Review, submitted the review for fact checking, they came back and they were like, dude, he needs to make up his mind because he seems to love some stuff and hate some stuff. And I'm like, yes, that's true. And they're like, okay, well, the headphones are obviously broken then, so we're going to send you another pair. And that took like a month, and that meant that, all of the work I'd put into the review, I couldn't invoice for, so I'm already grumpy about that. And then I get the new headphones, and I plug them in, and I listen to them, and I'm like, no, this is exactly the same, And then what's funny is like 6 months later, they pushed a firmware update that I think slightly changed the sound and diminished some of the problems I had with it. But it was just awful because it was just like they wanted, I don't know, and maybe this is just an indictment of our industry, but they wanted a positive review or a negative review, and they could not deal with me finding things that I liked about it and things that I didn't like about it and trying to describe it in such a way that the reader could determine for themselves whether that's the sort of thing they would like, which is what I think a review should do. They wanted me to be yay or boo, and I'm like, no, there are good things and there are bad things, and there was no room for nuance with them, and that was upsetting. Yeah. How about you?
Oh, I got a good one. I don't think I've ever told you this story. So when Al Griffin and I were working at Home Theater Magazine, Al Griffin, now at Tech Radar, veteran tech journalist, DVD had just come out. Ooh. And Al had, I was kind of focusing on audio and Al was focusing on video. And, Al had been kicking around for at least 5 years doing this stuff. And, and me for longer. And so Al rounded up like 6 DVD players, like all 6 you could even get at the time. And literally all 6 you could get. And it was like an like an RCA and a Philips.
There was a Zenith.
Maybe there was a Zenith. Maybe there was a JVC. I don't know. But he had 6 of them. And, we lined them all up, did a blind test, and we're kind of like, no difference. They all look the same. And so he wrote that. He said, hey, look, we had blind tests. We couldn't tell the difference. And so the next month he got in this Sony and he comes in my office and I was like, oh, did you try that Sony? He's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, it's the same as all the others. He's like, no, there are substantial differences. And I go in, the Sony had more detail. I mean, Sony was a level beyond the engineering of everybody else. And some of the others were copycats anyway. They were, not real engineering efforts. They were manufactured by whoever, Toshiba or somebody. And so we published a Sony review. We're great. Well, then this company, Tiger Direct, comes to us. And they have what was then a brand new thing called a home theater PC. Okay, which is basically a Windows PC. And we're talking Windows 98 or something, probably.
It was Windows 98, yeah.
And with a DVD drive in it, right? Nothing super. And so, fine. So Al's like, oh, great, cool. And so he writes this review, and we sent all our reviews out for fact checking at the time. And so he writes the review and sends it to the guy. And Al's basically like, well, yeah, it's a DVD player, and it looks basically like all these others. Not as good as the Sony, but basically comparable to all the other players in the market. And it's a computer, and you can do your computer-y stuff on it. And it's got it had a video card that had like component output or whatever, so you could hook it up to a TV and all that. And so the guy says, well, no, ours is better than the Sony. And I'm just like, I've seen companies sometimes fall in love with their own products and they think they're the best, even when they're not. Every reviewer has been through this. And so I said, look, no, we blind tested it with multiple people against the Sony, and it's not as good. And then he says, well, you need to have a Faruja line quadrupler and all this kind of stuff, completely not understanding that, like, no, if you take something and then blow it up bigger, it doesn't make it better, okay? Yeah. Nor does putting it through a quadrupler, which is, taking its own liberties with the picture. And So we published it, and then he wouldn't let it go. And I saw him at some trade show, and he was still kind of hammering on it. And then he had this guy who was running the company had some familial relation with Bill Curtis, who was the founder of Home Theater Magazine, right? And so I guess he was Bill's sister's brother-in-law or something like that, right? And so he tried to do an end run around me, and right. And so the thing is, you really didn't mess with Bill Curtis, because Bill Curtis defended his employees like a mama doggy with her puppies, right? I mean, he just did not allow people to mess with his employees, and and I can't remember if I even had a chat with him about it, but maybe I did, and it was like, and he's like, "What's the deal with this thing?" I'm like, "It's just he's got a generic DVD player, and he thinks it's better than Sony," and some eye rolling, and we move on. And but it was really just annoying that someone would go around. Yeah, it's embarrassing for the reviewer if they're bothering your boss, right?
Yeah.
And so, however, that was annoying to me, and it still kind of, bothered me. But it just dawned on me when you posted this question, it dawned on me I haven't heard of Tiger Direct in a long time. I wonder what happened to them. So Wikipedia. Scroll down to, let's see, legal and other issues.
Nice.
Federal Trade Commission ruling or issues a cease and desist against Tiger Direct for violations of the presale availability rule, and so on and so forth.
Nice.
Let's see what else we have. InfoWorld's Robert X. Cringely reported in 2006 that Tiger's sister company, OnRebate.com, which handles payouts for the discount dealer, appears to specialize in the insufficient documentation gambit. And what else we have? Dell sued Tiger Direct for selling discontinued and outdated Dell products as new and under a Dell warranty, and also products from a third party advertised as Dell products with a modified version of the Dell logo. And then there was a Florida Attorney General lawsuit in 2009 about how they were basically, they have rebates, and it was like you send in the rebate, and they just wouldn't send you the rebate unless you complained, right? And and then there's a whole CBC thing of them faking, editing and their online reviews on their website. And then the two brothers that ran the place went to prison for obtaining kickbacks and other benefits to hide their gains from the IRS, blah, 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 blah. And so that particular dude who we dealt with was in prison for 5 years. And so, far be it from me to take pleasure in other people. And, maybe it's our fault, because had we raved about this thing, they wouldn't have had to start criming.
Yeah.
But whatever. So it's one of those rare situations where it actually, for me and Al, actually is quite a satisfying result. So whatever.
Yeah. What about the best? I've got a best for you if you don't have one right ready.
Best review experience?
Best review experience.
Go.
The best for me was the Trinov Altitudes 32. And what made it the best is when John Heron, friend of ours, originally approached me about doing the review, he was like, "Don't worry, we will send somebody to your house. They will do all of the calibration for you. You don't have to worry about any of that." And I was like, "Get off my lawn. Go away. No, either I set it up or I'm not doing it, because if I let you do it, then I don't understand it, right? And if I don't understand it, what's the point of me doing the review?" And we had a long conversation on the phone, and he eventually, I think, started to believe me that I could handle this. And what's bad is I got the thing in and quickly realized, I am over my head. But I figured it out, and I learned so much about so many of the things that we've discussed in the previous question, the question about the Harman target curve, because when you have most room correction systems, they've got their own target curve. Like Odyssey actually has a couple. Sometimes when you buy a product that has Dirac from one company, they'll have the default Dirac target curve, and then they'll have their own in-house target curve. With the Trinnov, you get no target curve. It is flat, which, as you know, would just sound absolutely dreadful. And so I was like, oh, I did not know that. You literally have to draw your own target curve with that processor. And so, of course, the first thing I did was go to my bookshelf and grab my copy of Dr. Toole's book, which you had given me for Christmas, the 3rd edition. And I'm just like, okay, I'm going to cheat off of Dr. Toole's paper. And it sounded terrible. And I had to, read deeper. And doing that, going through that process, making all of the mistakes and learning it made me understand Dr. Toole's book in a way that I don't think I would have just reading it academically. That hands-on experience was really transformative for me. So anything stand out for you?
Oh, so many. I mean, there's just so many good review experiences I had, but there's one in particular that I love because, I love measuring subwoofers. And so I found out, I was visiting Paul Hales of Pro Audio Technology, friend of the podcast. And he had this just monstrous subwoofer. It was just, just for super high-end custom installations and stuff. And it was like the size of a refrigerator and a half. And I can't remember what the driver size was. I think it was 24 inches or something. And he had some crazy amplifier powering it. And I said, oh, I'd love to do CEA 2010 measurements on that thing. And he's like, come on down and do it. We're not going to bring it to you, but if you want to come down and do it, sure.
That's amazing.
This thing was humongous. So I went down. It was actually great. He cleared out the entire workspace there because we needed a lot of space, right?
The big warehouse that they've got, where the
big warehouse.
Yeah, okay.
And so I had to bring my reference sub down there. Which when you have CEA 2010, you do a correction curve if you have a less than perfect measurement environment, right? So you correct for the acoustics of that environment. So I had to calculate a measurement curve, which is pretty complicated, but it took a long time. And we ran the measurements, and this thing hit 131 decibels, something just insane. I had to move my measurement mic further back because it was starting to push the limits of the measurement mic. And wow. It took a long time, but it was so much fun. And just to hear what this thing would do, and the whole place would just go like, because the CEA 2010 tones are like this, womp, womp,
right,
womp,
right,
and just you could feel the whole building just kind of go, just kind of stretch a little bit, like like in a submarine movie where they're going to crush depth, and you start to feel that. It was kind of like the opposite.
Yeah. Wow.
It was really cool. That was a lot of fun. And I didn't have to unbox or rebox the product. So that was a big plus.
Ooh, that's the best. That's it. That's what made it the best review experience.
Yeah.
Heck yeah. All right, man. What you got next for us?
I have, this is from, we had a lot of friends of the podcast. That's nice. Erin Hardison. What is your personal setup and why did you choose those components? Go ahead.
In my main 2-channel listening room, I am running the NADC 3050 integrated amp. Bought that after I did the review. Loved it. It's perfect for my purposes. I love the VU meters. Man, I'm a sucker for VU meters. Sounds great. Will drive just about anything I need it to drive. If I need it, it's got room correction, Dirac room correction. I rarely use it. I'm going to be using it soon because I'm going to be working with Joe Mariano on a review of Magic Beans.
Excellent.
Yeah. Speakers are Paradigm Studio 100 V5, which I've had these speakers for since they came out, really. And I've never really found anything that I like better for my 2-channel listening room. They're beautiful. They sound great. What more do I need to say? I mean, they're just gorgeous speakers and they sound amazing. So I've got an Oppo whatever that I'm using for my disc player. I've got a U-Turn Theory turntable that I just picked up this year. And I've got an SVS PB 1000 Pro subwoofer in the system that I sometimes use with the Paradigms, usually not, but I always use when I'm doing a 2.1 setup for a review. What about you?
Well, I have, unlike you and Erin Hardison, and every other reviewer pretty much, I have moved beyond the staid paradigm of, say, Stereophile or the Absolute Sound, where you have this, hallowed listening room where you have your perfect chosen components set up, and it's this religious experience, because I work for Wirecutter. So my job is to test colossal piles of relatively cheap stuff. And so my personal setup is whatever. If I'm testing sound bars for Wirecutter, which I do a couple times a year, my living room will be full of sound bars, and I'll be changing them out. And every one of them I live with for a few days and watch some movies on. And, same with like Bluetooth speakers. I'm just constantly testing new Bluetooth speakers because those just never stop coming. Same with, regular, bookshelf speakers. I've often got new ones of those coming in. So I set those up. I mean, I could set up a decent reference system if I felt like it, but I haven't done that in ages just because I have this constant churn of equipment. I will say that probably the closest thing I have to a personal setup is I have the 10 Hi-Fi, what's the number? 3 plus something or another, the little like multi-driver, and they're cheap, like $60, $70. And I have the Bluetooth dongles that go on the back of them. And they're close to Harman Curve. They sound really neutral. They sound really good. Oh no, I think they're not hybrid. I think they're just a single dynamic driver. I can't remember, but they're really good. And that's what I listen to, like when I go to the library or something and I'm working on articles or something like that, and I just want some really good sound, and I don't have to worry about, airplane noise, because, the library's quiet, right? So I don't need noise canceling or anything like that. I don't even really need isolation. And those are very portable. And so that's the closest thing I have to a reference system. And, I'm mixing music all the time. So I use JBL 305P Mark II monitor speakers, and those get hauled all around my house depending on where I decide I want to mix, because I might mix from the couch. I might mix up here in my audio lab, whatever. So I have just such a giant pile of stuff, and it's just constantly getting churned, because that's my job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Churn is my job.
Churn is your job. Okay, we got a question from Lauren Dragon, who many people will know as sometimes guest in the podcast. She also does the voice of our Patreon segment, the After Hours. So she asks, what do you consider essential reading or viewing for folks who want to gain a better understanding of audio?
Oh, well, I've written some good articles over the years. But
essential. She says essential.
Right. Probably, so much. All right, look, the Floyd Toole stuff is for home audio, right? That's where you have to start. And they are coming out with a new one. There's a 4th edition
coming early next year.
With headphone stuff from Sean Olive and Todd Welty. And I think Todd worked on the in-room stuff because he's the subwoofer master. And that's always essential. I mean, there's more knowledge in that than there is in every audio magazine ever published combined. And there just is. And that's one. If you're into speakers, the Loudspeaker Design Cookbook, it's very technical. I mean, there's graphs on like page 2, but I still remember the first time I read that, it was before I even met Vance. I read it and I was just like, oh my God, this is how speakers work. It was just incredible. And then who's the guy? Bob Cordell has the book on power amplifiers. And he has, I think, the best book on power. I think it's just called, I can't remember what it's called, but it's
first Christmas gift you ever bought me.
Oh, okay. But he has a full explanation of Class D in there, or at least an explanation of Class D that was full until we encountered the Bruno Puzzi's paper that was on Home Theater and hi-fi.com, whatever. And so it has, it's easy to understand. Also, I just have to say, I'm going to get ridiculed for this, but if you look online, there was a guy named Forrest Mims who wrote a bunch of little books for Radio Shack, little like basic manuals that you could get for like $3 or something. And he did one that was on basic, and that's where I learned how to design. I learned basic circuit design from him. From looking at his circuits, it was really simple. You can, I don't still have a copy of it, but you can find it online pretty easily. Just look for Forrest Mims, Radio Shack circuit something. And that gave me, and some people have argued that, well, he got this wrong, but it did allow me to understand, like, oh, this is how audio circuits work. And if you look at that, I mean, that's a good starter. I'd start with that if you want to understand circuits. You will be leagues ahead of 95% of all audio reviewers, because they could not build you a simple preamp circuit, most of them.
Yeah.
Which I could do when I was in high school. I did.
Yeah. I would add to that list some of Monty Montgomery's videos, especially covering digital to analog conversion, because he does a really, really great job of breaking down how it actually works, why high res is not as important as people actually say it is, why like 192.24 specifically can be bad, as a music delivery format, and just a lot of hands-on stuff. Like he will use an oscilloscope and a system setup, and he will do digital to analog and analog to digital conversion in real time, just to break a lot of the myths that people have or propagate about D to A. And I think that's fascinating stuff. I'll put a link in the show notes. So,
okay.
What you got? What's next?
Oh, another one from Lauren. What aspect of audio do you wish you knew more about?
Ironic, given what I just said, but I wish I understood Delta Sigma better. I don't. Every time I think I've got my head wrapped around Delta Sigma is probably the most common type of digital to analog conversion chip, right? And what it does basically is take low sample rate, high bit audio and convert it to high sample rate, low bit audio. And every time I think I've got my brain wrapped around the way it works, my brain breaks. And it's like I couldn't explain it to my dad to save my life. So I wish I understood that better. What about you?
I really wish I understood circuit design better. Like I can build you from scratch a pretty good preamp. I can build you an amplifier that will work. It'll be fine. But I don't, I look at all these at publications like Audio Express where they talk about, they may have a design for a preamp or something in there, right? I can tell you why. If I look at a schematic, I can say, oh, this is the input stage and this is the voltage gain stage and stuff like that, right? And here's the feedback loop and all that kind of thing. But I don't understand all the interactions of it in the way that a real engineer would. And, I'm a seat of the pants engineer. I can build you stuff, but I kind of don't necessarily understand how it works. And that's not uncommon. I mean, I remember when I was at Dolby, we had Dolby Pro Logic 2 that Jim Fosgate had invented. And I remember one of the senior engineers at Dolby said, after he evaluated it, he said, this circuit is just a work of genius. He said, I don't think Jim really understands how it works, but it's genius.
That's brilliant.
And so, I'm kind of at that level, and I really wish I was at the level I would be if I was a double E and I had worked in circuit design for 5 or 10 years. Because clearly, if I read Audio Express, these guys are many levels above me, and I'm really grasping at it. Yeah. So,
all right, I've got one from Geoffrey Morrison. What is headphone impedance, and how does it affect sound? I don't think this is explained well enough in most places.
It's a complicated question. It's also one that you don't.
Jeff is a complicated dude. So.
True, but it's also one that you really don't have that normal people don't have to deal with. That's not no one ever described Jeff as normal. So
thank goodness.
That's the delightful thing about him. One of the many. And so basically, impedance it's easier to think of impedance in terms of resistance, right? And resistance is, 50 ohms or 100 ohms and the amount of resistance to flow. Impedance is the same thing, but with AC, right? With alternating current, which is audio signals, right? So the difference between impedance and resistance is that resistance is the same no matter what you pump into it, DC, whatever frequencies of sound you want to put into it. Whereas impedance has the potential to change with frequency, and it almost always does. I mean, if it doesn't, it's called a resistive load, right?
Right.
And an example of a resistive load would be a typical planar magnetic headphone like Hi-Fi-M. They have a flat impedance. So with headphones, especially with dynamic headphones like we're wearing, your impedance changes a lot with frequency, right? So typically you'll have like a bump in the bass or somewhere like that, right? And the electrical phase of the impedance will also change as opposed to just the magnitude going from 32 ohms to 60 ohms or something like that. The phase of it will flip as well. So what happens is if you have an amplifier that has a high output impedance, and by high, I'm going to say 25, 30 ohms or up, right? Which could be, maybe I'm being too, maybe 10 ohms and up. I don't know. But like a typical, tube headphone amplifier will have a big output transformer on it, which has a whole bunch of coils in there, right? Big coil of wire. And so that coil of wire has a certain impedance to it, right? So it has output impedance. So it'll have a high output impedance of whatever number of ohms that interacts with the varying circuits or the varying impedance of the headphone, right? So if you think about it, a filter, right? Think about an audio filter, right? Well, an audio filter is going to be, the simplest is a resistor and either a capacitor or an inductor, right? As you change the values of the resistors and the capacitors and the inductor, it changes the characteristics of the filter, right? And the frequencies that the filter operates at. So if you have an output impedance of 1 ohm for a headphone amp, right? Well, it's not enough to really interact with all this stuff, right? And all the different ups and downs of the impedance curve. But if you have a lot more impedance, if you have an output impedance of 10 ohms or 50 ohms, or some professional amps have an output impedance of like 100 ohms, then it will interact with, it basically vitiates the characteristics of the headphone. So it's adding its own, that's why, like when you see stereophile reviews of tube amps, right? John Atkinson will always run it with a resistive load and then with a simulated speaker load that has impedance swings to it. And he'll show you how if you run this thing into a resistor, it's got a flat response, but then if you run it into a speaker, these tube amps, because they have a relatively high output impedance, the sound just goes all over the place and it radically changes the sound. So I could go on forever. Impedance it took me years to understand impedance.
Yeah.
Put it to you that way.
It's complicated. Yeah.
But I think there was something else I wanted to say about impedance. Oh,
I mean, I think that's largely responsible for why a lot of people will mistakenly say an amplifier has muscular bass or something like that. And it's often the interaction between the amplifier's output impedance and the transducer's input impedance, So that can,
right.
with speakers particularly, you've often got a big impedance dip in the bass, the upper bass, whatever, somewhere between 100 and 200 hertz or something like that. And if you have an amplifier with too high an output impedance or not enough current or whatever, that can make your speaker sound like it has less bass than it is capable of having. So yeah, it can change the character of the transducer quite a bit.
But we should also mention that in the past there were a lot of headphones with like a 300, 400, 500, 600 ohm impedance, right? Which you almost never see now unless you specifically go out looking for them. And there's very few of them out there anymore. And you used to have headphone amps with a high output impedance. And there were a couple different reasons for this. One of the reasons for the high output impedance is, people plug headphones in and out all the time, right? And so you can short out the circuit. So if you have a high output impedance, the amplifier is always seeing some kind of resistance there, right? So it doesn't blow up. So it's not a short circuit, okay? So part of it is for protection. Now, chips nowadays have, a lot more sophisticated protection built in, so they don't need all that now. But then there were also, and this is secondhand, I only vaguely remember this stuff from when I was a kid. You find 600 ohm impedance headphones on like your crystal radio set and stuff. But I'm told that like back in the day of say like Motown or something, right, where you had people using headphones, and back then amps were really expensive, right? And so people would plug a whole bunch of headphones into the same headphone amp, right? I remember, I think it was Ray Parker Jr. was talking about how the Motown studios just had this one central console thing, and everybody just plugged their headphones into it.
Wow.
And all their instruments and mics and everything just went into this one central console, and everybody was powered off the same amp. And so what that does is it means, the more impedance you have in there, the less you're going to get like blasted out if you just start plugging headphones in, and the level won't be changing as much as you plug 5, 6 headphones in versus just one pair of headphones.
Yeah. Cool.
So,
wow.
There you go.
We got another one from Jeff on your end, don't we? What do we got?
Let me see. My phone, I have these on my phone. Okay. What DAW, digital audio workstation software, and microphones do you use, and how long does it take to edit an episode?
Well, we both use Reaper, which I think we've mentioned quite a bit before. For editing, I mean, it used to take me like 20 hours to edit an episode, and I've streamlined that way down. It takes me like 6 hours now, I think, to turn an episode around, usually.
Yeah, me too.
So, yeah.
Something like that.
I mean,
but probably more important is the plugins that we use.
Yeah.
Which we use different plugins. So
that's right. Well, and also I run some of my plugins on like the raw audio before I give you. I try to do some denoise and things like that. So So we've got like, I use Isotope stuff, their declick, their denoise, and then I use a plugin called Clear to do de-reverb and de-ambience, as it's called. And then most of my other plugins are from a company called Tone Boosters, which I really, really love. I use their compressor. It's super, super clean. I use their EQ because it's just everything you could ever need in an EQ. And I also, when I mix, master, and edit, I use their tape bus emulator to provide some last little bit of compression on the master bus, and to give it a little bit of organic noise and character.
Okay. Wow. That's a lot.
Yeah.
All I use is the Waves simulation of the SSL bus compressor, which is Solid State Logic, which was the first company that came out with like programmable mixing boards where you could like program the fader moves into them. Decades ago, their boards happened to have a bus compressor that, for the stereo mix, right? That a lot of people just loved. And so several people have come out with simulators for that, where you can plug it in and it works kind of just like it. And I found out about this from Rick Beato, not a friend of the pod, but I wish he was. He just doesn't have any idea who we are. But So, he was just talking about how this is just a great compressor. It's really simple to use, and it kind of just glues everything together, and you just kind of run everything at a moderate level. And I use it on all of my productions. I used it on ever since I got it, it's like, oh, this works. And I use it on our podcast. I used it on my album. Did not use it on my Audiophile Society headphone test disc because David Chesky said, don't, except I think I did. I can't remember. I used more processing than I confessed to David. He was very processing phobic, but I used it when I had to. There were a couple of cases where I really needed to.
Jeff also asked, do you use any acoustic treatments around your mics or rooms? I've got I use a Shure SM58. You can see here I got a little pop filter on it. Yeah. Other than that, no. I mean, I originally intended to move to the other side of my room over there and have a little bit of diffusion and whatever. My biggest problem is I've got a window right here. So it's like every time a car drives by, you can kind of hear it. But I use a lot of the denoise to take care of that. I was originally going to, and at this point, I've sort of figured it out, the situation with plugins so much that I kind of don't need to. So I don't do any room treatments right here around me. No. Do you?
Nope.
There you go.
I like to keep this room live because this is where I do headphone noise canceling tests. And so you can see there's a speaker wire behind me. There are 8 speakers plus a subwoofer in here that I pipe uncorrelated pink noise. So 8 different pink noise signals. Well, they're the same, but they're not in time. You know, they're not in time and phase.
They're decorrelated. Is that the way you put it?
They're decorrelated, yeah. And so I pump those through, and so it's supposed to be this big. You're supposed to be in this noise bubble. It's actually quite wonderful when you do it, because if you run pink noise really loud just through like 1 or 2 speakers, it's pretty horrible. But if you do it through like 8 at the same level, it's really like pleasant. So.
Ooh, nice. Very nice. All right, what you got next for us?
From Marty, I've heard you both comment a number of times that similar measuring equipment, not similar measuring equipment like an audio precision or something, but similar equipment that measures similarly, like amps and DACs, basically sound the same or at least indistinguishable. So why would anyone spend more than a few $100s on the best measuring amp or DAC they can find? I.e., why buy a Levinson or Pass amp if you basically get the same measured performance from a Topping or Hypex amp?
Well, I mean, I don't think we've said they sound the same. What we've said is when you ABX test them, you can't identify which is which, right? You can't reliably identify which is which. But look, I'm of the opinion that, and this is blasphemy, I know, but I'm of the opinion that sound performance is not the be-all and end-all. Maybe you like the look of an amp. Like I said, you know, this NADC 3050 amp that I've got, as far as I can tell, not a lot difference between it and the C398 other than some connections, but the C398 kind of doesn't inspire me in terms of its looks, whereas this C3050 has got the dancing VU meters and the wood sides, and that is meaningful to me. You know, one of the things that I put into consideration when I was buying my turntable is how does it look, you know? So I think the big thing for me is let's just be honest about why we're picking this stuff and don't claim that there's a performance advantage when there's not. There might be corner cases where there is a difference between like a Hypex amp and some gigantic monoblock amp or what, and it depends on your speakers, what have you. But it's just, I mean, I think what we're saying is stop pretending like there are performance differences that there aren't in most use cases. What do you think?
I agree with you. I will say, though, that, you know, with passive speakers, some of, you know, if you're talking about a topping amp, right? I mean, I use the WIM amp a lot, which is 50 watts into 8 ohms, and I measured it, and it's good. It's like 52 watts into 8 ohms. So, but I find that if I hook it up to just a pair of speakers like the Triangle Borea BR03s, I use a whole lot, wire cutter pick, you know, top pick or whatever, it doesn't have first of all, it doesn't really play loud enough for me because you can't push the WIM amp, at least no way I found. You can't push the WIM amp into distortion, unlike a typical, you know, Class AB amp. And it doesn't really play loud enough for me, and it doesn't really get the, you know, I have the triangles hooked up to a Sony, you know, like a Sony ES series receiver, you know, really good receiver right now. And it's just got a lot more, you know, punch and slam and deeper, not necessarily deeper bass, but more authoritative bass or whatever, more tactile bass.
Would that be just a function of the power supply, you think? Or
well, I guess, or just, you know, the Sony is an old style Class AB receiver. So it has, you know, it has headroom, right?
Yeah. But if you turned it down to the level of the WIM, you don't think you'd hear the difference between them?
I'd probably hear a difference still. Certainly in the bass. In the bass, I probably would. But I also think that I'm not going to say all amps sound the same because I don't think they do. And if I do A, B, C tests, right, like of 3 amps and compare them, I might hear some differences. Now, if I ABX them, I do have an ABX box, right? So if I ABX them, I can't hear the difference. And I've tried this so many times and I just gave up on it because I've tried some pretty extreme amplifier differences, things that I thought like, oh, well, this is a really good amp. This will beat this really cheap piece of junk. No, I even tried like a really primitive Class A tube preamp that I bought from a company called Bottlehead. Is that what it's called? And they make these tube amp and tube preamp kits that are really kind of primitive and stuff. And it was battery powered. And I shot it out. It's just a preamp, but single ended. 1 tube per channel, as simple as you can get it. And I shot it out against a Krell preamp. I'm like, oh, this is a really primitive tube thing versus this, really good solid state thing, and could not distinguish them in an ABX test. I mean, I did, but when I AB'd them, I kind of heard some little differences. But how much of that was bias? How much of that was me thinking like, well, the tubes are going to sound warm, and the Krell is going to sound authoritative and controlled, and blah 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 blah. But so this is why I don't have a lot of patience for a lot of these inner detail kind of guys that just go on and on and on and on and on about all the audible difference between these amplifiers when they don't do controlled testing. They don't do level match blind tests, and when you start to see. When they do it, Stephen Stone, friend of the podcast, we have a lot of friends. This is great.
We do.
He had told me, he did a lot of this stuff, but he really started to like level match DACs, which is not easy because you got to have a different computer driving each DAC, right? And he did a whole column about it where he's like, this is a lot of work, and you do all this work and you actually get the testing right, and a lot of these differences. You don't hear so much anymore. And, we did a bunch of them for Wirecutter. We did like 10 different headphone DAC amps, little dongle things. And all these guys are going on and on about differences and stuff. And it's like, we heard little differences, but like, it was so tiny that it was just silly to even care about it. It's like, it was me, Lauren from Wirecutter, John Higgins, who's now with Digital Trends. And, we're all just kind of like, there's little tiny differences, but who cares? Yeah. And, you can't really say one's better than the other. They were just little tiny, tiny differences. And so anyway, we've kind of gone on and on about this, but my attitude is, look, if I was putting together my in-game system, which I probably will soon because I'm about to retire, I would not probably get a generic amp. Ideally, what I'd like is like a cool tube amp that has an HDMI input.
What? You're going to have to build that.
And Bluetooth.
Oh, no, wait. I think the new Vincent stuff, it's hybrid. It's hybrid tube and solid state.
No hybrid.
But I think it's got HDMI, so maybe they will do tube with HDMI. Maybe, I'm saying,
but I want also EL84 output tubes because my first ever tube amp, which is my second one, my dad gave me a Heath kit when I was a kid that I could barely work, but I found another one on Coney Island at this like flea market kind of thing there for $25, and I like retubed it. I found some cheap Yugoslavian tubes in Japan. It's good to be an audio reviewer sometimes. And I plugged all this stuff in. I think I changed some of the caps out, and I loved it so much. And it was EL84s, which is I think that was the most commonly used tube. Because, if you think about it, most tubes were in things like TVs and table radios, most audio tubes. And so you only needed, an EL84, a pair of EL84s will put about maybe 10 watts, something like that, in the Class AB push-pull, which is all you need for most applications. So EL84 is my favorite. There aren't a lot of EL84 amps out there, but maybe I'll get an EL84 amp and maybe those Harbith LS35A things or something, or maybe some old Teals or something like that.
Okay. Cool. We've got one from Jordan Fegley, who wants to know where he can buy your music in physical format. We just did an episode about this, which I don't know if we're going to release that for the public before we release this or after. But hey, episode, 42 of the podcast, we talk about where to get your music on physical format. But tell us again, man.
Right now, now we are on Bandcamp, which is a really great application where you can sell your music and you can listen to it all for free as well. Bandcamp's supposed to put you on all the streaming services, but I don't find myself on the streaming services. So I think we're going to probably go through a digital distributor as well. And then you can listen to it for free there. Just because
he says physical formats.
Okay, physical formats. You can get it in CD form, and we have 2 CDs out. The new one is called Plaid Pants, just released, and you can. Oh hell, I'll tell people. I can't remember the discount code. You have to go look at our podcast and find the discount code. But it's in the show notes
for this. Yeah,
for the most recent episode, and the deal
down here too.
The deal ends on January 1st because, like ShamWow, I can't do this forever. So that's what the guy used to say. We can't do this forever. And they show the same commercial for like years. But, anyway, so you can get it and you get a discount. But then after that, you could still buy it. And, if you want a cassette, let me know. I could make you a cassette probably. I got a blank cassette kicking around here somewhere. I do have a cassette recorder. It sucks though. I'd probably go to the trouble of going up to Vancouver to Innovative Audio up there, the vintage, because Gordon Soak, who's the proprietor, would happily let me make a dub on his cassette deck. And I'm going up there tomorrow, and I'm up there all the time. So
very nice.
I could make somebody a really nice cassette dub. If that's what you're into. I could probably do reel-to-reel too, but that would get complicated because he's got tons of perfectly tweaked reel-to-reel decks up there as well.
Nice.
But vinyl, we're going to have to get a little more of a fan base to support that. Like the fan base needs to go from above a dozen. So
we'll get you there. We're
working on it.
Yeah. All right. What you got for me, man?
From BillyG. More of a tech question. Remotes. Do I have to buy the same brand of components to avoid more than one remote? I do not understand the trigger, concept of linking components. I think you are the perfect guy to answer this.
Yeah, so I think triggers are great, and I actually use them quite a bit. So basically, you'll see it's a little 3.5 millimeter jack on the back of your component, and usually what it will do is... Usually the way it works is it will make it so that when you turn on one component, that will turn on other components, right? So typically, one of the most common things is if you've got a preamp and you run a 12-volt trigger cable between that and your amp, when you turn on your preamp, it automatically turns on your amp. Or maybe if you've got a CD player, you run the trigger output from it into your preamp, and when you turn on your CD player, that will turn on your preamp, which in turn turns on your amp. So basically, it's just a way for one component to say, when I turn on, send this signal over this cable that will turn something else on. Man, universal remotes sadly used to be a much bigger deal than they are now, and I don't even know what I would recommend. I mean, I would go look at the Wirecutter and see if they've got a recommendation for universal remotes anymore. I mean, back in the day, you'd just tell somebody get a freaking Harmony because get whatever Harmony fits your budget, but they're gone. So
they still have it. Adrian Maxwell does that, I believe. And
what's the company that's doing universal remotes now? For normies, not programmable stuff.
Some weird name. And she says in there, hey, this is a dying category, but some people will still want it. And it's called, I can't remember, but you go look at Wirecutter for remotes. You'll see what she says. I do want to say, though, that here's a question for you, which I don't know the answer to. I'm used to reviewing sound bars and also some stereo speakers that have HDMI input or the WIM amp. Also HDMI. And typically what happens with those things is if you plug them into the ARC jack of your TV, then when I turn on, and I have a Roku streamer plugged into my TV also, I just use the Roku remote I hit the home button on the Roku remote. The TV turns on, the sound bar or the speakers usually turn on. All the sound bars do. The speakers are still a little dicey. And the TV turns on and everything just works. And I really hardly ever have to use anything but the Roku remote. Now, I have this Sony receiver. And granted, it's a relatively old Sony receiver. But it has HDMI ARC, except it doesn't do any of that stuff.
Right.
Do the new receivers let your home theater system work like a soundbar where the whole thing just comes on if you hit one button?
Yeah. And it's a setting that is often inconsistently turned on or off, and it's called HDMI/CEC, Consumer Electronics Control. And like, I always have to turn that stuff off because I have a Control 4 system. You know, I've got a programmed smart home, right? And if you have HDMI CEC, then it works kind of the way you're describing. And if you turn on no source device, that turns on everything connected to it in that HDMI chain. Yeah. I don't want that. I want my control system doing it all. But yeah, if you're having trouble finding that setting, go into the settings of your AV receiver, and look for HDMI control or HDMI -CEC, and that would be the thing to turn on to make it happen. So, okay. And that is also a lot of times you have to turn that on. You can, a lot of times, if you turn ARC on, which might be its own separate on-off setting, that will turn CEC on by default, and then you can individually turn it on or off. But it depends from manufacturer to manufacturer. So,
okay. Yeah. Next up.
Yeah. From Doug Pratt. Did you ever hear Allison speakers? Are you familiar with Roy Allison's ideas on room match bass and wide dispersion?
Yes, and I was. That's kind of old school. I actually knew a guy in Brooklyn who, this is when I was just starting out, who I worked on a video with back when you shot videos with, camcorders. And he had Allison speakers. And, the thing about Allison speakers is you put them up against the wall. And so they use the bass reinforcement of the wall, which I think is smart. I think they don't have probably as much of a spacious sound as a speaker that's kind of more out into the room, because there's a lot less, they can't reflect sound off the back wall in the same way that they don't have as sort of, there's not as much sound blasting all around and mixing up and making a big ambient thing. However, the nice thing is where the back wall is, and where the floor is. So you can do, the designer can really tune the speaker to a degree that is to where the performance is somewhat more predictable. Since with if you're doing just like a Paradigm Tower speaker or something, right? Well, they don't know where people are going to put that. So how do you tune the bass? Because the closer you put the speaker to the wall, the more bass you get. The more you pull it out, the less bass you get, right? So what do they tune it for? They have to kind of hit a happy medium and then let people fine tune it, because the room's going to change everything and people's personal taste will change everything and all that. But with this, and Ken Cantor did the same thing for NHT, like 25 years ago, with these big speakers, and each one was like a little dividing wall. And they were awesome speakers, but they were weird because they were like, I want to say they were probably 2.5 feet deep, but they were only about, that wide. And so they were like little dividing walls in a room, right? And they were, about, I don't know, probably, tower speaker height or whatever. But the thing is, the idea was you push them back up against the wall, and also the two speakers would form their own little walls. Right, so you had you have really kind of somewhat predictable acoustics, certainly more predictable in a normal room. So anyway, I remember reading up on Roy Allison stuff, decades ago in Audio Magazine or something, but I have really forgotten about it. I want to say that I'm pretty sure that Floyd Toole covered that in the sound reproduction book. But I just don't remember what he said, because the only person who can remember everything that's in that book is Floyd Toole. Because it's like that thick, and it is information dense. Every time I feel like every time I talk to him, I'm like, I have some question. And he's like, that's on page 374 of my book. Literally.
Oh, the new edition is going to mess him right up, man. So I've been wanting to reread the book lately, but I know the 5th edition is coming. So I've been like, no, I'm not gonna. Yeah. I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna wait until I can read the new deal. So yeah.
Okay, I think it's my turn. Mm-hmm. This is from Mark Snyderman. I'd like your views on a dilemma I have. As a consumer of audio reviews, what should I think about reviewers whose taste in music appears to have very little overlap with my own? If a reviewer thinks certain music sounds great and I listen to the same music and can't stand it, and this is a common occurrence, shouldn't I be suspicious of anything that reviewer has to say about how music sounds on a particular system or through a particular component? After all, this entire enterprise is about music and how it sounds.
Well, for the most part, I would say no. What's important is that you're very familiar with the music that you're listening to, and that, I've gotten criticized before for using Allman Brothers' Blue Sky as a reference track in my recordings. People are like, classic rock, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, I know that song so well that I know what it sounds like when it goes wrong. And so if I'm reviewing an amplifier, integrated amplifier with my speakers with that song, it will usually be the first thing that will spotlight impedance problems, the impedance mismatches and things like that, or a power supply that's insufficient. And, some years ago, I had somebody criticize me and say, you should be listening to more piano music in your reviews. And I'm like, okay, but why? And he was like, well, because the piano is uniquely difficult to accurately reproduce, right? And I was like, okay, well, whatever. And then I started listening to more piano stuff and realizing it's actually useful. It will help me find problems that might not have been immediately obvious before, might have taken me a few more recordings to get through, and it is a good tool. But for the most part, I don't think it matters if you and I have similar taste in music. What matters is that I know my music and I know what I should be listening for, and I know tracks that highlight those problems. So what do you think?
Okay. Well, I have a different perspective, but one that you're not going to disagree with. The music I listen to for my own enjoyment has nothing to do with the music I listen to test audio gear. Now, I do a lot of casual testing of audio gear just to kind of see if I like it by just my day-to-day listening, right? Which could be, so far today, it's been Shabaka, Nina Simone, and Led Zeppelin. So
yeah,
could be also, and could be all sorts of things, right? I like to listen to lots of different stuff. And that new Shabaka album is killing. Anyway, so
kids today.
It's great, man. It is so great.
I've never even heard of this artist.
Yes, you have. Shabaka Hutchings. He's part of that like London crew that does. You've heard his music.
Okay.
He hangs out with like Michaela McCraven and people like that. Whose music I know you do like. Yeah. He's part of that same genre, I guess, of kind of like new jazz, soul, R&B, trance, something. Anyway, but I don't do that other than just like my usual just messing around with a product and putting it through day-to-day use. When I go to evaluate products, and like I said, I'm churning. So I may be going through 20 Bluetooth speakers in the course of whatever span of time, a couple of half days probably to do that. And I'm going to start with Tracy Chapman Fast Car because it's a revered, that's what, the Harman guys found to be generally the best, most revealing cut for audio evaluation. So fine. I start with, and it is good, and I know it backwards and forwards. I listened to a James Taylor cut from Live at the Beacon Theater, which I got the stereo mix and ripped it off the DVD. It's got acoustic guitar and voice, and boy, it just, the acoustic guitar stuff on there tells you so much about tweeter response because it's a really clean recording of some kind of a fancy guitar he's got. and then his own voice. And so I can, from those two recordings, and then I hit it with, some kind of a really heavy bass hip hop recording. Like I use Audrey Nuna, Damn Right, where the bass goes, boom, 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 right? And so some of these little Bluetooth speakers just start scooting around the table, points off.
I always use Hey Ladies by Beastie Boys. Yeah.
And or they'll just start distorting badly, or a lot of speakers, even big, bookshelf speakers, you play that stuff through them and the ports will start to chuff like crazy and all that. And it really kind of shows you. And then I run ZZ Top, what's it called? Chartreuse, from the album that they did that Rick Rubin produced. That's super compressed, right? So it's like just maxed out. Your VU meter just goes up and sits. And I use that for maximum volume testing in lieu of a better. I'm exploring other methods, but there's nothing that I found that I can quite get to work yet. Anyway, there's a new method called AES 75, which I'm trying to get to work, but no luck yet. But anyway, I crank the device to the maximum volume with that, and I'll pull, if it's just sounding terrible, I'll pull it back a little bit, right? I'll see how loud I can play it, and I'll measure the maximum volume using, LEQ, the level over time, right? The same way you would with SPL exposure if you were measuring for OSHA or something. And, with those cuts, I can tell if like a Bluetooth speaker or a sound bar or something sucks or is good. And then I may go on to, I have a bunch of other cuts on my phone. If I was doing more high-end audio stuff, I'd probably do more. But still, I'm using, there's a Lester Bowie cut that was recorded like 30 years ago I use for imaging or sound staging. There's 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 cuts that I use, and they're not cuts that I listen to. I don't believe in that. Like, I sat down with my favorite, with my Steely Dan. Let's not pick on Steely Dan. With my all these reviewers like ECM artists, right? Like that have like unpronounceable, Scandinavian names with like all sorts of weird things on the vowels that I don't even know what that means. So those kind of dudes. And some of those artists I actually do like. But I sat down with my sparse piano recording from ECM that has like lots of reverb on it. And it was blah, 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 blah. And so often these guys are just trying to show off their sophisticated taste in music. And that is not how you evaluate audio gear. You evaluate audio gear the way they do at Harman. You have a few tunes that will work and will reveal what you need to know about the product. And then you can mess around with it and listen to whatever music turns you on.
Right. Yeah. So it's not important that you vibe with somebody in terms of musical taste, just that if you as a reader or viewer need to trust that the person doing the review understands why they've picked the selection they've picked, right? And that's not easy.
In so many cases they don't. And look, this is just the fact of the matter is that so many of these reviews are just some dude sitting around in his underwear listening to tunes that he thinks are sophisticated. They may well be, but it's like it's a culture. It's not it's a cultural statement, and it doesn't have a lot to do with reviewing audio gear.
No.
I mean, the people that I know that are really good at this. I mean, I've consulted for companies too. I've learned a lot from doing this. And the people I know that are really good at this can rip through something in about 5 minutes and tell you if it's any good or not. And can tell you what the problems with it are.
Yeah, absolutely. So. All right, we've got one for Darryl Wilkinson. You might need to explain this question, but Darryl asks, what is your favorite Lirpa Labs product?
Oh, okay. Well, since I actually worked on some Lirpa Labs reviews, I can speak with some authority on this. I'm going to say, do you have a favorite? Because, you know me, I can go on forever, like I have been.
Oh God, what was that crazy America speaker with all the drivers? I can't remember what it was called. The Freedom, I don't remember.
The Freedom 1776
yes.
FY something with, I think it had 13 drivers, one for each of the original 13 colonies.
That's right.
It was very kind of a jingoistic. It was back in the days of the Iraq War and stuff, and very jingoistic. And it had. I love that one. That was Jeff Morrison wrote that one.
Right.
And
But do you want to explain what Lirpa Labs is for people who might not know?
Well, sure. It was supposedly Dr. Loof Lirpa, which is, April Fool spelled backward. And Audio Magazine would always have this every year, and people always looked forward to it because it was just stupid stuff like a chain drive turntable and stuff like that. Just ridiculous things they'd make up. And so Dr. Lirpa was silent for many years, and then Sound and Vision, when Jeff and I were working there, we were lucky enough that he, came back into the industry so that he could provide us with some products like that speaker. And the best thing about that speaker was there were these flame decals on it, like from a car. And Jeff's line from that was, the flame decals add 3 dB each.
Love it.
3 dB.
Amazing.
Of what? I mean, preposterous enough that it's decals that add, but it's like, and a lot of people wanted to go out and buy that product. I'm not kidding you. It was pretty shocking. Yes.
No.
People were like, is that better than the definitive technology? Literally, we were getting emails like this. But my personal favorite was the Barry White headphones.
Oh, I don't remember that one.
Also written by Jeff. The Barry White headphones were, Barry White had a very deep, resonant voice, like you. But, Barry White made you sound like Ariana Grande. And so.
It's true. Yeah.
So it was 8-inch drivers. Okay. 8-inch drivers with,
I think I remember seeing a picture of Lauren wearing those.
Yes, Lauren Dragon was the model for that. And and so it was 8-inch drivers, and Jeff wrote this one too. And the remarkable thing about this is that it's the deepest bass response ever from any audio product. It went down to -10 hertz.
It's actually sucking bass out of your head.
Nothing else has achieved that performance.
That's a true story. True story.
Nothing. You can take all your Bruno Putsies with their fancy amps and your Wilson Audio with their big giant speakers. They cannot match the performance of the Barry White headphones. Can't even come close.
Darryl also had a serious question here. In addition to Sandy Gross, whom we had on a previous episode of the podcast, what other highly influential personages in the industry, living or dead, I would prefer living, please, would you love to interview, and why? I was emailing with Dr. Toole the other day about an article that I'm working on, and he was like, hey, dude, I'm like finishing the book right now, so chill. And when he finishes the next edition, when the next edition of the book comes out, I would like to have him on Audio Unleashed if he'll join us, because I recorded and engineered a podcast interview with him for the Soundstage podcast conducted by Jordan Guth, the new host of that. It was amazing. I mean, I'm just sitting there watching the screen like a fanboy. So I would love to be the one asking him the question. So I would say Dr. Toole. What about you?
He would fit our criteria, because we have not published or publicized our criteria for who we can have on as a guest. But we can have on anybody as a guest, except you can't talk about your own product.
But I kind of want him to talk about his own product, man.
But he's got a book. Doesn't have a speaker or something.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
But like some speaker guy is going to come on and go, oh, my speakers are awesome because I do this. Oh, that's so boring. And lots of other people do that. Other podcasts do that and have all these guests. It's like, oh, well, our products are great because blah, 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 blah. And we don't want that. That's just so boring to me. I just can't listen to that. So that's our rule. We probably should have more guests on, but we can't have people talking about their own product. They could talk about an issue, like a speaker designer could talk about speaker measurement, or could talk about acoustics or something, right?
Spoiler warning, industry. We both really want to have Paul Hales on the podcast. And it's just, we have been in discussions for a long, long time about what is the right topic to have him discuss? Because he's such a fascinating dude and such a wealth of knowledge and understanding, and also kind of, controversial at times. And I just love him. But it's like, what is the right topic? When do we bring him on? And so you and I are constantly talking about that, and one day we'll figure it out. So.
Yeah, and for me, Vance Dickinson, who's the author of the Loudspeaker Design Cookbook and the editor of Voice Coil magazine, and a longtime friend of mine, and I think we probably will have him on one day because he doesn't have a line of speakers per se, but he's designed speakers for just all kinds of people, and he has the most no-nonsense attitude towards speakers. Like, he thinks speakers really matter, but he thinks a lot of the things that people think matter about speakers don't really matter. And a lot of his book is determined, a lot of his book, he shows, hey, we made this change in the speaker, like, reinforcing the sides or something, or the stuffing or whatever, all these different things, right? Or different diaphragm materials and all that. And here's the different results we got from that. And it dispels a lot of the, that's why once you read that book, you start to, and then manufacturers start to burble on about their driver design and stuff. You start to go, well, I guess you got to sell something. But Vance is like, you give me a good set of drivers and I can build you a really good speaker. They don't have to be like some exotic thing, just a good, competent set of drivers, right?
Yeah.
And so, but there's going to be more. We should probably do that more often.
Right.
Is there anybody else you can think of?
No, not off the top of my head. Yeah. Anyway, you got a question coming up. What's the next question, man? We got to wrap this thing up soon. I gotta
wake my phone back up.
Offended. Yeah.
Let's see. From AJ Wykes. Hi, Brent and Dennis. I've noticed that the two of you tend to be in pretty strong agreement with regard to what is and what isn't worth spending money on, and what you consider to be audio snake oil, etc. My question is this: aside from your individual musical tastes, is there anything in the audio realm you actually disagree on? Any heated debates you've had outside of the podcast? Thanks, and keep up the good work.
I think for the most part, if you and I have differences of opinion, it's in areas where we just don't know the answer, right? Like, nobody's really done the testing and figured it out, right? And so I think I probably have a little bit more faith in volume controls. I mean, you've expressed some skepticism about my belief that different volume control designs maybe make more difference than a lot of people think they do, or at least you kind of seem skeptical of that. I also think the distinction between active and powered speakers is an important one, and you don't.
I do think it's important. I just get tired of you harping on the pedantic difference between active and powered.
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, if
I get
we
enough of
disagree,
that in comment sections.
That's true. But if we disagree, I mean, I think it's stuff we just don't really have the answer to yet, and we're kind of like, well, I think it's this, but we don't really know. So, well,
also it's in personal taste, because I'm far more fascinated by exotic speaker designs than you are.
That's true.
And that's why I'm totally drawn to things like old Teals and stuff, and these new audio vectors, which just won the, I think it was Hi-Fi Plus gave it the Speaker of the Year, the audio vector. What's it called? Begins with a T. Triangle, Tempest, something. We talked about it. It's a 3-way speaker.
Oh, yeah.
It's got a baffle that flips back. Really neat design.
Right.
But I'm kind of drawn more to the exotic end of high-end audio than you are.
I am definitely not. Yeah, no, I like
you're
boring
more
and
functional.
safe.
You're more of a Canadian speaker design kind of, black boxes.
I like VU meters, man.
Receiver.
I love VU meters. I am just a sucker for VU. I think they literally make my music sound better.
Okay, so. But, I'm definitely more into the history and the, all that stuff.
Yeah. So yeah.
Go ahead. What you got?
All right. We've got a question from MikeK. And this is a big one, so bear with me. My question is how to make the best use of objective data about speakers for purchase decisions given the current state of retail in the hi-fi industry. For example, he says, suppose two speaker systems, one from a well-known, frequently reviewed and respected British manufacturer, and the other from a small U.S. direct sales-only manufacturer that is well-established, has received a few excellent reviews, but is infrequently reviewed due perhaps to their small, non-existent advertising budget. The British system has published measurements from John Atkinson, Soundstage, Hi-Fi, and Full Spinorama available. The U.S. system has Klippel-based data from the manufacturer, or maybe one of the Jedis that you mentioned in a previous podcast. The basic measures of tonality, user preference, bass extension, and flatness are similar. Can someone without a degree in acoustic engineering use the available objective data to help decide? If so, where would someone start? If not, is it merely a coin toss?
If the measurements are close, either speaker will probably give you a satisfying result, especially since you're going to get used to them. I would try to go hear them if you can. I mean, it's hard to do, like he's saying, with the current retail situation, or at least go to like an audio show, and they probably aren't going to be showing the exact model that you are interested in unless it's brand new. But you can kind of get the general vibe, and I want to say that you can kind of, I think in consumer purchases, you want to some extent program yourself to accept it. In other words, you want to buy the one you like, buy the one that speaks to you, the one that, there's room for taste in audio products, and the taste involves a lot more than just sound. It involves the look of the product, it involves the backstory, it involves the price, it involves all sorts of stuff, right? So that's all I'm going to say is buy the one you like. Don't feel like if you have two speakers that both measure pretty good, and and you've got whatever anechoic measurements from this thing, or Klippel stuff from somebody else, and all that stuff. If both of them are looking pretty good, buy the one that just speaks to you. Where it could be just a marketing thing, but buy the one that you think is going to make you happy, and don't worry about it, because you will not learn any more about music from one versus the other. They will both tell you, you will listen to it and you will go, yes, that is John Coltrane, not Boots Randolph. Okay. Right. So it's just, I think we overstate the importance of a lot of this stuff. Once you have a competently designed audio product, it will get the job done. And, you can fuss about it all you want, but my fussing is more personal. Like, does this speaker, is this cool? Like, I really, really kind of want to buy some of those little Harvests that are like their version of the LS35A. I've never heard them, but I've just seen glowing reviews of them, and I've seen, John Atkinson's measurements and stuff. It's like, I bet I would really like those. And, if I went and heard them, probably, I don't know where to go hear them. I
think that's what he's asking. What if you can't hear them and you're going based just off reviews that are backed by measurements? Is there enough that a novice like him could glean from the measurements to give him an indication of whether or not he would like the speaker? I think that's what he's asking.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's all basically right there in the Canadian research and the Canadian/Harman research. And, with a speaker, flat on axis and well-behaved off axis. And to get more fussy about it than that, they're two speakers, get a PSB speaker that's all of which are designed like that. Get a Polk speaker, all of which nowadays are designed like that. And which one are you going to like better? Whichever one looks cooler or something, or maybe you have fond memories of Matt Polk's ads where he's wearing like a lab coat, or I don't know, whatever, but they're both fine. They will both more than get the job done. And so buy what you like, buy what speaks to you. Even if it's just like, hey, I really like I like Herb Reichert's reviews in Stereophile. Get the speaker that Herb likes, right? As long as Atkinson doesn't say it's a piece of crap, which he wouldn't say, except you can definitely read between the lines when he thinks something is a piece of crap.
He says it without saying it.
Yeah, if you like Herb Reichert or Steve Guttenberg or whoever, right? And they like a speaker, and then you see the measurements and the measurements look pretty good, just go buy that speaker. That's what I say.
Yeah. All right, what else you got?
I have from Paul Widner. What is soundstage in your view? Can an amp make a difference in the speaker's soundstage?
Soundstage for me is basically sonic holography. It is the illusion that there is music happening in front of you in space that extends ideally past the boundaries of your speakers and hopefully would also penetrate into the room. So, you have width and depth, and you have a placement of instruments or sound elements or whatever in that space that not only have width and depth, but also height. And I am not one of these people who thinks everything has to sound exactly like instruments on the stage in a club or whatever. I mean, I love Jimi Hendrix. What does soundstage mean with regard to Jimi Hendrix? Well, it can't be the impression of real instruments on a stage in an acoustic space, but there is still there's a sonic tapestry there that goes from left to right and up to down and front to back, and it is that something that I feel like the music is coming from a space instead of just these two speakers. Now, is the amp going to affect that? Almost certainly not, but your preamp might in fact affect it if it's got something going wrong with like transient response. Maybe if there's weird transient issues or something like that, weird impulse things that might affect the timing. If you don't have good channel consistency, good channel balance, that can affect it, and you're going to make a face. But I think a volume control can affect it, because if you've got a volume control that is not consistent as you turn the volume up and down, then it's going to wobble, and that can affect your soundstage. And so things like that can affect it.
Okay, well, look, if you got a volume control and it's potentiometer, right, a knob with a variable resistor in it, that can, because those are bad. I mean, those are, they don't track, they track their audio taper, so they have usually 3 different tapers in them, right? So that they work differently depending on where the thing is set, and also they're not going to be consistent from channel to channel, because you're probably working with a stereo potentiometer, right? And there's no question that those could be off by a decibel easily, and you'd hear it, especially with with Haas effect. If you have a mono signal, right, and it's not perfectly balanced, and you have a boop or something, right, maybe a guitar string plucked or something, it's going to come from the left speaker. Even if you're 1 decibel off, right? So I think, sound staging, my explanation is simple, is imaging is this. Sound staging is this. All right?
Yeah.
So that's the simplest way to put it. And I do happen to think that amps can make a difference in the sound staging. I don't have any data to back this up. Certainly with the old analog amps that have, potentiometers in them. And I've heard this. I can't back it up with ABX. I've heard it in AB comparisons. So I have a vague answer. I'm not sure of myself on this one. I know that I wouldn't worry too much about it. I mean, I don't review a lot of amplifiers that have, I review a lot of these cheap amps that have a pot in them, but they're so cheap. I mean, I'm reviewing these $100 things, and I'm not really sure that anybody really cares about the sound staging with a $100 amp. But I don't want to discount the notion that amps can have an effect on sound staging beyond just flaws in an old school analog amp. I do think there can be differences. I can't prove it, and I don't get excited about it. I wouldn't buy an amp on that basis. I would buy an amp based on what tubes are in it and whether or not that resonates with my childhood.
Yeah. How do state-of-the-art flagship speakers from the 80s, 90s, and noughties compare to modern, moderately priced speakers? So flagships from the 80s, 90s, and noughties compared to modern, moderately priced. What about the areas of crossover design and components, driver, and cabinet? In the end, I'm wondering if one can get a better speaker by purchasing older flagships versus modern, moderately priced speakers. This is primarily a question of performance and build quality versus price.
The answer is maybe. I'm so lucky to have Gordon Soak as a friend of mine because I've been up to Innovative Audio and we've done a lot of speaker shootouts where, I go up there with my gear and level match everything and set it up just right. And we've compared, he's got Canadian speakers from he's got weird old JBLs and Pioneers and God knows what from way back into the 60s and stuff. But then he's also got like some of the Canadian speakers from like early 90s. And boy, so there's all this research really started to hit in the early 90s about what really makes a good speaker. And before then, it was just people sort of shoving drivers in a box and seeing if it sounded good to them. And then, once that research really started to hit and people started to build speakers according to that, everything got radically better. By the end of the 90s, it was getting hard to find bad speakers. In the beginning of the 90s, it was hard to find good speakers. So this is my opinion, but it's also true. I was there. I was a reviewer. I started reviewing in 1990. And, and I was at all those press events and I met all those speaker manufacturers. But to say specifically that I would hate to generalize though, right? Because how do you compare a 90s Magnapan to a Magnapan from right now? Well, they're the same, basically.
That's a good point.
Same with, Martin Logan's. I mean, granted, they've done a lot more sort of things with active drivers and stuff and, powered bass sections and stuff like that. But I would say that there were some good speakers in the 80s. There's nothing I want from the 80s, frankly. Especially, things like quads. Quads still sound good. I mean, the Martin Logans from back then sounded good. The Magnapans from then sounded good. But I think that speaker design really was together by about the year 2000. And by then, I was starting to measure tons of great speakers and find just lots of speakers that were like, oh, this is good. And there are manufacturers that still don't necessarily make good speakers that measure well and that, that conform to industry norms. And Bowers and Wilkins is our favorite example of that because their speakers all measure different. And
you just don't know if you're going to like them or not. And I might like one and you wouldn't. And so it's just kind of a coin
not to pick on them. Totem does the same thing. They voice all their speakers differently. And, but if
I just reviewed the Loon from Totem and it sounded weird and I loved it.
Yeah.
It's just, so how do you know?
I just really think that you might find some vintage speakers that you can get for $2,000 a pair, let's just say, right? That were designed in 1999 or something, right? That are better than a $4,000 a pair of midline speaker from some companies, but there's no way we can generalize about that.
Right.
But it's possible.
Yeah.
I've heard stuff in Gordon's shop that he's selling for a couple $100 a pair, old stuff from the mid 90s that sounds fantastic.
Very cool.
So, you could, those old Mirages some of those old Mirages are great. A lot of the old Definitive stuff, is still great. I got a friend who's still got a pair of BP10s and they're great. And that was like the
I've got
first
a pair of old
Definitive ever made.
Infinity IL30s from the 90s that it's just like, I don't use them anymore, but I keep them around because they're freaking great. And I figure someday somebody will ask me, hey, you got any speakers that I could have? And I'll be like, these are awesome, Yeah. So, yeah. All right, what else you got?
Question? All right, from Jay-Z. This is a good one.
I'm going to ask this one. Hang on, I moved it down the list. I'm sorry because I ran out of questions. But ask another one and then I'll get to that.
No, you asked it.
Oh,
I have
okay.
the answer.
Okay, well, crossovers. What about the longevity of expensive crossover capacitors, apart from their sound quality? If I'm going to invest thousands in a set of good passive speakers, I think I'd like them to last, let's say, for 20 years or more. Shouldn't we expect the components, crossovers, cones, of expensive passives to outlast electronics, e.g. receivers? And if they do not, is that often due to worn out crossover parts?
As it happens, I called up Gordon Soak this morning and asked him. Yeah. And I had a lot of anecdotal opinions about this, but he knows because he has a big speaker repair business. And he said, on the speakers, the surround is usually what goes. That's the part that goes around that connects the cone to the frame. And I guess he's talking about the surround on the woofer, but or the mid-range. But he says if it's a foam surround, you can expect them to last about 10 years, but it's plus or minus a lot depending on the quality of the product. He said if it's like a butyl rubber surround, he says as long as you're not in an area where you have a lot of salt air, like right by an ocean or something, he said you can get 20 years of life out of those. Mm-hmm. He said in his experience, capacitors are just really not a problem. It's very rare for them to have to replace a capacitor. And they're working on speakers that are 34 years old, I think, in some cases. Right. So I do remember one, the guy who used to do photography for Home Theater Magazine, Randy Cordero, had a big pair of Klipsch's, not the Klipsch horns, but like some of their tower speakers that were maybe 15 inches wide and, 4 feet high or something. And somehow he blew one of them out and he said, hey, could you check that speaker for me? And it had a crossover it had a capacitor that had fried. And so I replaced the capacitor for him. That's the only case, but I don't know. I think it was probably just a defective component. So probably not a problem. And my general feeling on speakers is there's no reason a good passive speaker shouldn't last you 20 years. I mean, obviously I can blow one up in 2 minutes if I want to.
Yeah.
So.
All right. What else you got for us?
From Brian Viger, do cables matter, especially the expensive ones in our setups? My gut says cables don't really matter, and sound quality really comes down to input and output impedance and the component specs regardless of price.
Well, you've done testing on this. You've done extensive testing and found some differences, but it's like it turns out the really cheap one was the best, I think, in your test, right?
I tested years ago. I was goaded into this by Alan Devantier from formerly Harman, now Samsung, although it's all the same thing. He could, I don't know why, he was just like pointing out, like, you could, the speaker could make this change. As we were talking about, the impedance could, the cable could react with the speaker crossover, and it could make an audible difference. And you could write about this. I'm like, okay. So I got a bunch of speaker cables, and I tested them with a speaker, right? Not just the raw cable itself, with a speaker. I can't remember I think I tried a couple different speakers. And lo and behold, you could measure frequency response differences. And they were small. It was on the order of like a decibel over 2 octaves or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. Which is audible. You could hear, I mean, I didn't listen to them, but you could hear that big of a difference. And so fine. Now, let's say you boost the treble or you boost 1 dB centered at 2K over 2 octaves. Is that better or worse? I don't know. Depends on.
What was the correlation between price and the neutrality?
None.
Okay. Yeah.
The skinnier, if you get really skinny wires, they have enough impedance to affect things. But as long as you have reasonably fat wires, 14 gauge or something like that, unless you're going to run at 100 feet, which if you're running at 100 feet, you don't care anyway. So
probably, yeah.
I don't. So cables can affect the sound, but here we are decades into this debate and this controversy, and we still don't have any scientific data other than my study, which is on about.com, which is changed into lifewire.com, and they are total lowlifes, and I hate them because they changed my copy without approving it, or without me approving it and leave my name on it. But so bad. But, I had a really good article on this up on there, and I think they took it down because it they wanted maybe to get ads from people that make cable, and who knows. But anyway, so it can make a difference, but it's just not enough of one to care about. And my attitude is that tiny of a difference. If you think that tiny of a difference matters, you really don't understand music.
Yeah.
Because there's tiny differences in music all the time with the performers. No performer does the same piece twice exactly the same way. And, as you learn in recording really fast, people are making all kinds of decisions in their recording process that have a much bigger effect than a speaker cable. And so it slightly changes the sound, but, I'm sorry, give me some scientific data that really shows that people heard in a blind test that this cable was better than this cable. And, I just can't get too excited. It has nothing to do with music. That's getting into gear and consumerism.
Yeah, it is consumerism a lot. All right, last question, man. We're going to end on this one from Kenneth Wu. Why aren't audio equipment reviewers more specific about what noise sounds like? For an audio medium, they avoid describing noise in audible terms. Are they talking about hum, hiss, pop, pops, skips, pitch changes, interfering sounds from a radio signal and other electronic devices, or anything audible listeners can hear? I mean, my answer to this is one of the reasons audio reviews are so vague in terms of the terminology is if they're vague and nobody really knows what they're talking about, you can't disagree with them. If they say, True. I heard, this sounded rough or whatever, then somebody else can come and go, does it? I don't know. But the more specific you get, the easier it is to contradict you. So, and that's scary.
All right. So you shouldn't be hearing noise if you're an audiophile. Maybe if you have a really old tube amp. Some of those are a little on the noisy side, but not unless you turn it up really loud and put your ear right by the tweeter. Even the tube amps, I haven't had a lot of them, but I've had a few, and I've not had, I think I had one that had kind of a noise problem, but with most components, you really shouldn't be having noise problems. And I think a lot of the things, like there was that thing from Ansu's Acoustics, I think it was called, right? Where this thing you supposedly plug into the back of your component to get rid of RF interference, which results in annoying white noise coming through your system, which is a lie. It's a complete fabrication.
Yeah.
Annoying white noise coming through your system because of RF. Well, demonstrate that to me. What are you talking about? I've had so much audio gear. I've never heard annoying white noise unless I was listening to FM and I was between stations on an analog tuner. That's what white noise is. I
have, because there was do you remember when Paradigm was bought by that capital investment firm, and then they put out this Paradigm Shift line, and they had a couple of they did a speaker that they called the A2, and it stood for Active Atom. It was an active version of their Atom bookshelf speaker. Boy, that thing was hissier than a bed of crickets, man. I mean, it was just a constant white noise hiss coming from it.
That's a design flaw.
Right.
That's their fault. That's not radio frequency signals coming in and somehow, which your audio gear, unless you have some kind of a radio receiver there, right? Your audio gear doesn't, you can have a signal at, 100 megahertz or something, and your audio gear doesn't look at that signal, or doesn't have that signal come in and go, oh my God, 100 megahertz, what am I going to do? It looks at it, it's like light. It doesn't see that at all, unless there's some kind of a receiver there. And I guess it could be like Gilligan's Island, where he hit his filling and it made him into a radio receiver. Maybe that's what people are thinking. You remember that episode?
Yeah, I do.
That was actually not, Gilligan's Island was not a true story.
No way.
So, But I think people have this. It's just all this RF stuff is just such a bunch of baloney. But I do hear, I still test a lot of true wireless earphones for wire cutter, for noise canceling and stuff. I'd say once in a while, a couple of those get maybe a little bit noisy. But if you crank them like way up, but this is just not a major problem. And if reviewers are talking about noise, like Kenneth is saying here, they should qualify what they're talking about. Other than because if they're talking about some kind of RF doohickey that supposedly gets rid of all this supposed RF interference that's supposedly messing up your sound, tell us what the noise is. And you know what? Get Room EQ Wizard. Get a cheap microphone, shove it up against the speaker, and show us what this noise looks like. Right.
But I think a lot of times the terminology here is so vague that people don't even really understand the difference between noise and distortion, So
that's true.
And just to draw a line under that, distortion is a modification of the signal. Noise is something that's added to the signal. So,
exactly.
And people just are like, I don't know, what's the difference? I have to explain that all the time. But yeah, I go back to what I said at first. I mean, a lot of times the vague terminology in audio reviews is just people not wanting to put anything out there that could be contradicted or argued with. So,
yeah. And I should say, we're talking about modern components, right? We're not talking about analog source devices because, tape decks have hiss. There's just no way around it. They're going to have hiss. The very best professional tape decks will not have audible hiss. Vinyl's always going to have noise. It's always going to have ticks and pops. Just the nature of the beast. But in that case, it's certainly with vinyl, it's not a problem with the unit itself. It's a problem with what's on the record. I mean, I guess if you're evaluating record cleaners, you could talk about this. That would probably be a useful thing to talk about. But by and large, or if you're reviewing tape decks, which nobody does, sadly.
I think they will start soon, though.
Well, there's not enough to review. There's just a couple of reel-to-reels out there, and there's no new cassette decks except for little cheapies from Amazon for $20-$30. And the
is it Teak or Tiak? They're putting out some pretty big ones. They're putting out some big, like old school dual tape decks with DNR and all of that. So,
really,
yeah,
really, reel-to-reel.
No, cassette.
Yeah, but there's no new designs.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That's all basically new old stock.
Right. Yeah.
So they haven't, sadly, I keep thinking somebody should do that because there's so much interest in cassette now. And really this is the problem we have when we were writing about this for Wirecutter is if you want to make cassette dubs, then there's not really, like we had this FAO thing that records and everything, but it really doesn't sound good. It's very noisy. And the noise sounds like, right there it is, and standard tape hiss. And I found that like I would have to, if I wanted to make a cassette, I would have to go up to Gordon's shop up in Vancouver, and he's got cassette decks there that are dialed into like factory fresh condition that are perfect. And there's a Harman deck. It's like the old top of the line Harman deck, and oh my God, it's just so great. But you kind of need to do that. But I think that I agree that writers should, if you're talking about noise, you should be specific, and in fact, you should look. Noise is measurable. If it's audible, it is easily measurable. Period. So, and if it's minus 120 dB, it's not audible and it doesn't matter.
No, absolutely not.
So.
All right, buddy. Well, this has been a hoot, man. I enjoyed it. We've been going for 2 hours, dude.
Wow.
Yeah. This is going to be a monster
video.
video.
I hope this wasn't too boring. I enjoyed it.
Our patrons asked for it, so we delivered, buddy.
Yeah, But
Well, it just proves we're for sale, man. You give us $3 a month, we'll do what you tell us to do.
other than my sore butt, I would not realize we had talked for this long.
Yeah. All right, buddy. Well, this is. I really actually enjoyed this way more than I thought I would. So
I knew I would
you.
enjoy it, and I did. So.
I knew you would. All right.
And thanks to our
everybody.
patrons for sponsoring this whole schmear.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. So, all right. Well, go look for Audio Unleashed coming out soon, or maybe it just came out. I don't know. Episode 42's got some stuff about Brent's music. It's got some stuff about what? It's got some stuff about CD players. It's got some stuff about Apple dongles. So, yeah, go enjoy it. All right. See you
Bye,
soon.
everybody.